Okay, hello. We're going to start without Blake Alexander. He'll be here in a few minutes, he says, but we're just going to go ahead and get started. And then we don't have to do this agenda in this order if we don't want to. If you guys want to just get right into talking about what happened on Tuesday to clear the air, that might be easier. I don't know. Whatever you guys want to do, let me know what you think.
Well, that's fine with me, but maybe a recap from county staff as to what happened, or something like that, as opposed to our views.
Yeah, good idea.
Well, I mean, basically the interim ban needed 4/5 to pass. It didn't get 4/5 votes. We now have no interim ban. That's really what happened.
So I got a quick question. I wasn't at the meeting, but I did watch it on video. Is the county, yourself, Joel, being directed currently by the supervisors to draft up a permanent ban, or is that still kind of floating around?
The direction the board gave, to the extent that the board gave direction, was a permanent ban and for the work group to continue. Basically, I think functionally everything's the same. It's going to be a permanent instead of an interim. And we'll just have a gap period between last week and when the permanent goes into effect.
Has the county received any emails from the state in regards to any current applications on file because of the interim ban being not
just one that I know of.
Just one. Was that the same one that you had mentioned at the meeting?
No.
Okay, so it's a new one.
Yeah. And probably that's a matter of public record if I really thought deeply about it, but for now, I'll go ahead and just keep to myself who it is.
Just kind of curious to see what kind of mess that may have thrown to the county.
So far, it hasn't been a huge thing, but who knows? Cool. We've heard rumors. Somebody mentioned to the tax collector they were going to, and stuff like that. But so far, as far as applications, just the one.
Well, I guess part of then the question for what we're working on boils down to, initially we've talked about limiting permits and sizing of particular permits. And so I guess one of the questions boils back is to say we were going to think about 10 commercial permits as a maximum within the county. Well, what happens between now and whenever an ordinance gets in place, whether it be a ban or whatnot, 30 permits are issued. So some of the things we may talk about until something gets put in place are somewhat moot maybe unless we decide, because these are licenses, I understand, similar to liquor licenses potentially, where they are transferable.
They're not supposed to be transferable, but I think people find ways around that.
Yeah, there's ways to work around.
Okay, but so if and these are just fictitious numbers made up, 20 permits are issued between now and when something gets put in place, how then would you retroactively say that only 10 permits could be used, I guess?
Well, the state will revoke the permits that they've issued once the county comes in with an ordinance. So if we come in with our replacement ban for the one that we were supposed to have now, and then the state will revoke whatever licenses they issued. That's how the state rule works as far as I understand. So it's not really that, unless somebody wanted to fight about it, but I don't really think that they could or would. I think the state law on that's pretty clear. I don't know what it means on a county level, but in terms of holding that state permit, I think the state pretty gladly pulls that permit back if it's in conflict with county ordinance.
And then would the state refund, you think? Or how does that work?
I don't know.
Yeah, that's what I was
There's no
wondering.
application fee for the temporary permit, and then the annual fee that you pay comes in sometime later. It's like the temporary permit's a 180-day permit, 6-month permit, and then I think maybe at the 4-month mark is where the state wants your annual license fee, so I think you can get things going without spending a lot of money, so, but I don't know, they haven't, it's a new thing. They haven't bumped into this yet, I don't think.
Well, it sounds to me like at some point, there's a fee involved with pretty much all of these permits, right? And if someone buys these permits and ends up paying these fees, and then after that point, let's say, the county comes back and changes things, it seems like we got quite a mess on our hands as a county.
Yeah, it's very similar to what's going on with Calaveras County, but the problem in Calaveras County is a little bit different, I would suppose, and I'm sure Joel would probably say the same thing, is, they actually were issuing county permits. So, I mean, this is pretty much the first situation that I know of or am aware of in the state that we're kind of dealing with this situation. I think we might be the only county in the state currently that doesn't have some sort of ban in place or some sort of ordinance to regulate the taxation of it.
So my initial concerns, when I first heard about the idea of this move from the board, I didn't know really what to think of it because I hadn't really spent any time thinking about the consequences of it. So I wasn't super panicked at first. And then after it happened, I was panicked and I was really worried about it also because I hadn't had a lot of time to think about it. And then the following days, I was even more panicked about it. But now I'm less worried about it. I think that the technical, issues around people getting a bunch of licenses in the county and then keeping them forever are probably a little overblown. It'll be a little bit extra work for community development. Everybody's kind of has a responsibility to communicate to everybody what's going on clearly. But yeah, probably not a huge concern that I thought. So, but more of it, I think we all just sort of have feelings about it more than like real intellectual thoughts about what it means. Like Joel said, it doesn't really change anything technically about the working group or what we're doing. We continue on the same trajectory that we're on. But I think for me, it's distracting just as a basic feeling. Feelings of fear and insecurity, uncertainty. That's sort of how I feel basically. Without thinking about it too much, but I don't think those things need to continue. That's all. I just sort of wanted to voice that, and whatever message, if we choose to drop some kind of response letter about what happens, just something simple on that level.
I was thinking more along the lines of these are temporary permits we're talking about, but at some point it becomes a full-blown permit that someone's applying for and getting without the county doing something, right? Like you were just mentioning 4 months, and I don't know all these timelines, but at some point there's a long-term date where if the county's not doing anything, there's going to be permanent permits in place, and I think there's options that the county could be putting in these ordinances to, money goes to the county when you get a permit, and you're going to miss out on that. And of course, taxation issues, where there's literally right now, if someone opened a store with these temporary permits and started selling, $0 are coming to the county, but the county is required to regulate it. The county needs to spend time and effort and money to enforce the regulations that the state's put in place, even though we put no regulations in place. So I guess my thought here is, what really is our timeline now before things get quote-unquote out of hand?
Well, this open window is going to be real narrow. Maybe Joel can talk a little bit more about the next moves. That's what Eric was asking about, I think. I think we're going to have what's termed a permanent ban, a ban that doesn't have a set expiration date is what that means, and it will require 3/5 vote at the board, and we want to see that as soon as possible. So I think that's not going to be that long of a window, but I'm not real clear about the legal process of that, and Joel would know. Maybe you can answer.
An ordinance will need to be introduced at one meeting and approved at the next. And I don't know exactly which meeting it will come forward at, but it will be effective 30 days after it's approved. So realistically, we're looking at probably 2 months.
I broke my button. I just wanted to throw out there, you know, I was really upset with the way the ban happened. I don't think that any of the supervisors have the, you know, a reason to stand. They haven't stood for us. I don't see what happened as being like legitimate representation. On the other hand, without the county involved, Del Norte Patients Together has provided revenue that's more than the income I ever made at ShopSmart to at least 3 or 4 farmers locally, and it's collected $20,000 in sales tax over the last year, and have collected, I'm sure, at least $10,000 in excise tax since the beginning of the year. And you know, I mean, I'm at the point where I see our county, I love it, and we don't have the resources to really operate a government that represents its people somehow. It kind of represents wanting to make sure it's not troubled and it doesn't go broke, you know, while the residents do go broke and are troubled. And, you know, in business, what San Francisco does is they don't say, I want a limited number of permits. Of course, as Del Norte Patients Together, I would love to be the only one in the county. You know, that's special interest, you know. But what San Francisco does, you know, they attract the companies that will best serve their community. Google, we can't get Google here, you know, but by not applying sin taxes to manufacturing and inviting these places and telling them, hey, here, the future's here. When we can do cross-state transportation, you're on the border here. You know, we could get some businesses here. I don't think the county is going to help in the business aspects of raising our average wage or raising our GDP from private sector resources. And I can never give Roger Gitling credit for what's happened, but on the other hand, I would like to see, you know, I don't see any part of the county or maybe even this board trying to see how this is going to affect the average resident. You know, it's a lot, like Jesse says, there's a lot of fear and not a whole lot of real intellectual thought to it. So it's a mixed thought, I guess, and I just throwing it out there. But
I'm up. Yeah, sorry I'm late. I got a lot going on at home today. I don't have a philosophical talk on any of this. It is what it is. We're going to deal with it, and we're going to move forward, and my opinion doesn't matter. I guess I would like to know what our potential timeline is. So it's going to take 2 months to do an ordinance. Are we in a hurry? Are we not in a hurry? You know, I had to miss last meeting. I was on the phone listening. I caught parts of it. And so, you know, I've always been an advocate for not being in a hurry on this, and I still don't see a need to get in a hurry. We need to come up with really sound policy that makes sense, that we can all live with. And so I guess I'm looking for some direction, Jesse, as to what our potential timeline looks like.
Yeah, I would say, I don't know exactly what it is, but I definitely concur with that. I don't see this as a need to accelerate things beyond the trajectory we were already on, whatever that is. I think that we've been making really good progress, and it's been increasing exponentially. With each meeting, we get more productive and more focused on what we're doing. And this is a delay to that, definitely. Instead of me focusing all last week on details of commercial ideas, I've been focusing on other things, political things, you know, that I don't really want to think about when I'm doing this job. I don't want to be political. I mean, everything is, I guess, but to me, this is like, you know, a truly nonpartisan issue for the county, and it's discouraging to see it turned into such a totally partisan issue. Cannabis has been used in politics to further particular gains forever, so, and I see it again here, so that's all. But yeah, like Blake said, personal opinions probably don't matter so much, you know, it is what it is, and we'll, you know, move through it forward. Should we do public comment on this? I saw one hand.
Well, I don't know what, hi, my name's Paul. I've met some of you before coming to the regular county commissioner meetings. From what I'm hearing, I want to say that I've been going to the town hall meetings in the morning, and there's only one other person that I've seen there, which is Donna. But I went there specifically to try to get an idea of what that vote was about. And I did. And I think all of you are missing the point from what the reasoning was behind that. One, to force the issue, and two, to get that permanent ban. Maybe some of you might think that, but they wanted to get that permanent ban for next meeting because they know you're not going to be able to get an ordinance that's going to be strict enough to get some of these commissioners on board. And with that permanent ban, we'll kick it into next year. And then the thought was, the county moves so slow, it'll keep going and it'll be political suicide for anybody to vote against it. That's what's going on. They don't want this county to even have any recreational marijuana. You have to understand that. That's what's going on here. I don't think any of you, a lot of these people may not realize it, but that's what I picked up when I was there. That's the whole game plan, face to face from the commissioner, okay? I want you to understand that. Now, that's not my position. I voted for it for several reasons, because I've worked in the Forest Service. I wanted the damn cartels out of our forests. I wanted the people who are growing it illegally to pay their dues, like the rest of us. I would have gladly done it, but I'm not going to put myself, my family, my land in jeopardy, my kids in jeopardy. You know, I would surely love to do something like that for money for me because, hey, I work for the school district and I don't get paid crap. So anything else I could do to make money for myself and my kids who are growing up is a good thing, but I do like the restrictions. I've lived in Humboldt before moving here and went to school there. I knew a lot of people who were always trimming when I was in college. I knew lots of people who were growing in houses, in farms. I mean, I know a lot of people down there, and they're still doing it. But I do worry about them, what I've heard from Oregon, the corporations moving in, buying up the land, the people in the Williams Valley and over in Williams and Applegate just tearing up land and fields and farms and putting in crops. This is what the commissioners are worried about. And I think you know the two people I'm talking about. They are worried about that happening here, that the lily fields are going to get bulldozed over and it's all going to be pot. And no matter how much I try to assure them that's not going to happen, they absolutely do not believe that, okay? That's the people you need to convince that won't happen. So when you're drawing an ordinance, you need to absolutely convince them that there are going to be strict regulations on where this stuff can be grown, how it can be grown, who can buy land to grow it, where are you going to destroy the forest? I don't like the clear cuts. I go on Google Maps and I see all this stuff way out there in Trinity County. Oh my God, clear cutting the hell out of everything. You know, we only have a small amount of land, and I don't want it bought up by a bunch of corporations. But I also see that, you know, where people are not going to come directly here to buy pot from us. They might do it if they run out of pot when they're going through town, but they're going to come from all over California, all over Oregon. They've already been getting lots of pot. So, okay, I understand. So I just want to let you guys know that, okay? I think it's important for you all to know that.
So I definitely want to comment on that before we do more public comment. I've also been to several of Bob's morning coffee meetings and spoke with Bob and Roger a lot over the last year. And I just haven't been there when you've been there. So I know exactly what you're talking about. I know I went and talked to Bob on Tuesday morning before they came and did this vote to ask him, you know, what was going on and to talk about it, and hopefully he would listen to what I had to say. A week before that, Roger sent me an email asking what the working group thought of it. You know, I said the ban needs to be extended, and they did exactly the opposite of that. And I think that they're lying to you, honestly, and I hate to say that, but it's absolutely untrue for them to say that what they did was any kind of progress. We're not getting a ban out of what they did. We already had a ban. That vote that they voted no on was to continue the ban that we already had. And I am dying for one of them to come up publicly and explain how that makes any sense. And it makes me emotionally upset talking about it over again. You can probably see it in my face and in my voice. But it's totally unbelievable to me for them to come to this board and vote against continuing the ban and then to say how we need a ban. It's the height of hypocrisy. It makes absolutely no sense. And they refuse to explain it. I've asked in emails personally. There's a total refusal to explain it. So they're lying to the public when they say they're doing it to accelerate things. It doesn't do anything to accelerate things. You can't accelerate a process that takes time. We're here trying to put together an ordinance in a piecemeal way so that we can have some action a little bit at a time, because we can't generate an entire ordinance that regulates the whole industry all in one shot. So it's going to take some time. And I think the board has stayed separate somewhat from the issue in order to give the working group the space and the clearance to do its work and interact with the public like this, and then bring them a recommendation, and then their political thing starts at that point once the working group brings a recommendation to them. But I think that Supervisor Gitlin and Supervisor Berkowitz are being totally disingenuous when they claim that they are helping to accelerate this process or helping to give it direction or any of the things that they claimed. It's totally false. We had direction. We have direction. We did a lot of work on a personal cultivation outline. That's going to the Planning Commission. So it's, you know, we did that. It seemed like Roger wasn't even aware of that. That was his demand number one. And then this meeting, we're supposed to be starting in on the commercial discussion, which it's delayed now because of this. So I really appreciate you bringing that up. It's the same things that Bob explained to me speaking in an email. And it's just either I'm not a genius, but I'm not stupid. And I feel like I've been being made for, you know, they're expecting me to be stupid, and the public too, to believe what they're saying. And so I'm not saying that's the case, but what I'm asking for is a really clear, articulate explanation. Like more than a few sentences, more than political platitudes, more than, oh, it'll get the ball rolling. You know, it, whatever, puts people on record. I mean, those are just one-liners. They don't really mean anything, and they're false. So it's upsetting to hear that they're still telling people that when it's not true. And I'd like to hear from one of them directly to explain how voting against the interim ban is going to help us. You know, if they just wanted to force the hand and have a ban that doesn't expire, okay, but it's the same thing. As soon as the Board of Supervisors has an ordinance that they can consider and vote on, then that ban gets lifted. It's not permanent, like it can never be changed. There's nothing in government like that. It just means it doesn't expire automatically on its own. And that's what the one that they were voting on Tuesday was. It was to extend it for another 10.5 months, because that's just how the California state law is written. you get 45 days, then you get 10 and a half months, then you get a year. It's just codified. It's not a timeline that this county picked. It wasn't like we said, oh, we're going to do 45 days. You know, it wasn't an option. That's just how the urgency ordinance laws of California work. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that's basically how it is. And so there wasn't an option to come back and say, oh, let's do this for 90 days or whatever. I thought there might have been, but I'm not a lawyer. I don't understand, you know. But now I do. And the next step was to extend it for another 10 and a half months. And I don't know if Bob and Roger just didn't get that or what, but I think they need to explain it and stop making me explain it.
Yeah, and at any point within those 10 and a half months, or any point within the previous 45 days, you could lift it at any point. It's not a finite timeline
right, it can
saying
be
you
lifted
will
any
be
time.
under a ban for 10 and a half months. It's just all this was, it's a 10 and a half months, and then at that point, the county must decide if they're going to continue it and explain to the public the reasoning behind it, I guess, and so forth. Now, you're faced with, at the moment, there's no regulation, and potentially the primary option is to impose a permanent ban for which the county does not have to continue to explain to the public what's going on. It's just going to be banned until at which point they decide to unban it, right? And I don't know, and maybe Joel can explain better, the way we were looking at it originally, I think, between us on this panel was that we would put these things in steps. Like we came up with a personal cultivation ordinance, which the ban didn't have anything to do with, but maybe the next version was talk about commercial sales and commercial production. But with a permanent ban in place, which again can be revoked at any time, can we put steps in? Can we go in and say, here's the commercial ordinance for sale, but we still have banned production? Is that possible under a full-on permanent ban?
So, you know, the full ban initially will say all commercial cannabis activity. And then if the work group comes forward with, say, a retail ordinance, the ban will have to be amended to allow retail. And then it comes back with a distribution ordinance. The ban will be amended until ultimately, you know, probably just cultivation, I'm guessing it's going to be the last thing, will be the only thing banned under the ban. And then when that ordinance comes forward, we just repeal the ban altogether. You know, it'll work.
Okay, so basically what's happened then is that we've removed any type of ban at this interim moment, potentially long-term, potentially short-term. But if or when a permanent ban gets put in place, it's not changing anything that was already in place, other than the fact that potentially this period of time where the county is completely unregulated and losing, I guess, income, I guess.
Yeah, we're all right back. We're going to end up just being right back where we started from, with a big waste of time and but it does, you know, it creates this conversation, I guess, and it brings out the truth, you know, and in that sense, you know, bringing out the truth is good. Public comment.
Yeah, Carrie, I think you guys, what I see of this, I'm kind of looking at it from outside the box, but I think you guys need to, don't worry about what the county commissioner is doing. You guys need to take the leadership on this and get this done and get it to the county supervisors and throw it on their desk and say, here, there it is, approve it or no. And because I think the longer you wait on this gentleman here may be right. They may push this all out to the side and it just goes in the ditch somewhere. That's why I say, I think, you know, if you're only meeting once a month, maybe you ought to meet once a week. If you're only meeting once a week, maybe
We're meeting as many times as we possibly can.
I mean, really, and get this thing done and get it to the county supervisors.
I totally agree with you, and that's why I'm so frustrated, because we are working so hard to get this done, and what happened on Tuesday was an exact U-turn from that.
Ignore
so.
that. Just ignore that. You know what? It seems to me the whole thing is, well, we got our direction, what kind of direction we are. Well, you guys are the direction. That's why I say I think you guys need to get it together, because I'm not for it. I tell you, want to see this. I mean, just because our county voted for it and said, okay, that doesn't make it right in my mind. But hey, look, it's not your decision. It's the county supervisor's decision. So get it done and get it on their desk and let them decide. And then if they decide, no, we're not going to have it, well, then they're going to have to accept the political downfall for that. But, you know, I mean, you're talking about, you know, there's people with jobs and taxes and all this other stuff going on. It's just going down the toilet right now. So don't make it, you guys, everybody's going to point their finger at you guys and say, you guys are the fault for not getting it done, you know? So, and that could very well go that way. So, but anyway, thank you for listening.
Thank you.
Sure, and, you know, we're going to probably kill half this meeting just talking about this, so that's a bit of a problem in it to itself. But additionally, we are just, I guess I want to think of us as like a sounding board to some extent. We are here providing intimate knowledge of how this commercial system can work and how it can operate within existing entities in this county. The staff is the one who's writing up these ordinances with our input, for the most part. And yes, we can keep pushing on this, but what did just happen at the County Board of Supervisors is going to burden the said staff that's tasked with writing up these ordinances. And so they are now going to have less time to complete what they need to complete in the short term. You know, they're going to have to work on maybe an ordinance that we weren't talking about. Maybe they are going to be working on writing up this permanent ban ordinance. So in the short term, yes, the county staff and to some extent us are going to be burdened with a slower timeline on this.
Yeah, county staff's already spent time and money on it as it is. It's already a negative on the books. So
Jesse?
let's turn it around right now.
So, sure. So it seems to me that you know, we just need to continue to proceed with our game plan, and that is to develop the details to ordinances. And at some point, we have a finished product, and then it goes to the supervisors. In the meantime, whatever they're doing generally shouldn't matter. Doesn't affect me. I'm just here for the reasons that I signed up for originally. And so I guess I would just propose that we just continue on and quit talking about this. Move on with our commercial plan or the next questions, and let's start answering some of those.
All right.
Yeah, I tend to agree with Blake. I mean, I think, you know, obviously getting it out is good for the soul. It's good for the people to hear. But yeah, I think we should just move on. There's not much we can do about it now. It's already been done. Hasn't, from what Joel has mentioned, it hasn't affected our staff, our committee here, our direction. We have the same direction. Maybe this will give us a little bit more impetus to meet a little bit more often. And maybe we can wrap stuff up a lot quicker than we had actually anticipated. Sometimes a little kick in the butt can get you going.
Right. I see one public comment over here. Go ahead.
Thank you very much. They will come in and control this completely, make their own rules. And I just have a project down in the desert in Alancha and down in that vicinity, the foothills of the Sierras. And that county was so afraid of the state coming in, they finally made their decisions. They were doing the same thing here. They're just, one guy, oh, I don't really care. So you can't let that happen. And the bottom line, this gentleman is right. The bottom line really isn't the weed, it's the land. The land that you're allowed to grow the weed on is what's going to be valuable, period. And that's the way it works, and the restrictions are beyond belief that they're coming down the pike. I think it could be anywhere from $14,000 to $24,000 for a 3,000 square foot grow. That's what you pay for your permit to grow. And if you want to do acreage, like a 4-acre canopy, you're talking over 100 grand. Now, who can afford that? Nobody but big companies, period. So you want to avoid them coming in, or they're going to do just what he said. They're going to take over. They're going to run everybody else out of business. And this is a county, I got run out of here 28 years ago for growing weed. And I grew up here. And it was a hard negotiation because they wanted to pull my family over randomly and do anything they wanted, so I left. But now I'm coming back because this is a paradise, and it's a secret paradise. This is one of the most beautiful places in the state of California, and you do not want the state getting deeply involved. And unfortunately, you do. You have a board that I thought I was on the playground the other day when that meeting was going on. I really did. I did. And I'm just saying, I can show you paperwork here. I already have a legal, my company is already established here, which you're gonna have to have. You have to have an LLC, you have to have something. You can't just go out and grow.
One more minute.
Oh, well, I can just summarize with that. If you allow the state to come in, nothing good is gonna become of it, period. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. All right, should we get to business? All right, so Blake wasn't here when we worked on the bulk of the personal cultivation outline. And so we can have a discussion on where we came to and any ideas or changes before we send that off to environmental review. Or I guess Joel has to write the ordinance first.
The question, I guess, has it been written to be submitted to some entity?
The time I would have spent writing, I spent on other things in the last 2 weeks. But, you know, it would be helpful if you guys could kind of just confirm and make sure that all the details are right, and I'll try to have it done in the near future.
Thank you, Joel. I understand everyone's distracted with extras.
So I guess to recap where we thought we were at, I think we're talking 25 square foot is for everybody.
Yeah, did you have a chance to look over the written version of it that I sent? It was a while ago. No. Okay. Okay.
Okay. And so that we're calling tier 1?
Yeah, we had the 25 square foot with a 10-foot setback in containers. There's a height limit there, 6-foot height limit, and that sort of accommodate the smaller lots. And then we had and then you were here for most of that, I think, yeah. And then, so then we got to the tier 2 is 100 square feet, 40-foot setback, and then the container and height restrictions go away with that one. And then all the state regulations come into play, the not visible from a public space. I don't have them all in front of me. But the things that are required by the state, I think, are either duplicated by the county or left out to be determined by the state. I'm not sure the exact strategy with that. And then
Tier 1 is remain audited?
correct, yeah. Yeah, movable, the idea that they're movable. And then so tier 3, 300 square feet with a 60-foot setback. Same as tier 2 with the other concerns. And that was about it, meant to be kept simple, so that it's easy to enforce, easy to metric, easy
And-
to measure.
All three of the square footage was in a contiguous space, right?
Yes, one contiguous space, correct. Yeah, that's right, and the indoor component is 100 square feet. And then just with the caveat that if you do anything that would ordinarily require a building permit or whatever, then you would need to get that building permit, but nothing specific to the licensing of growing. Yeah, and that stays with the traditional lease agreements that, you know, traditional California law, and however that works, rights retained by landlords through traditional lease agreements, and the county wouldn't be involved in that aspect. Yeah, the state says it can't be visible from a public space. And so we didn't get into defining how that works, what fences look like and such. Those details, I suppose, could come later if there was an obvious need for it.
I was thinking the fenced reason was really to keep, say, the neighbor kids from wandering off.
Yeah, locked space is a separate
Locked,
category.
okay, that's
Is
it,
it
all right.
that the state defines that, and I think the county was going to make a definition on what that meant, on what locked meant, which we have yet to see.
So I think we've got a good understanding on that. Should we ask for any public comment regarding personal cultivation?
Public comment on the personal cultivation outline only. Let's keep it specific, since we're going to do, you can do multiple public comments at this meeting, but we'll keep each one a little shorter. So like maybe a minute for each one, and then you'll have an opportunity to come up for the next topic. So public comment on the personal cultivation outline.
Jesse, I would just ask that you kind of reiterate for me and others, what triggers tier 1, 2, 3?
It has to do with the setbacks you're able to meet. So that's the sensitivity issue. We talked about lot sizes and things, but it was just kind of a burden for community development to look these things up, and easier to just have a foot measurement from a property line. And that's how you do it. So if you can't meet the setback, if you can only meet 10-foot setback, then you're limited to this 25 square feet. If you can meet the 40-foot setback, you can go to 100 square feet. If you can meet the 60-foot setback. And so in that regard, it automatically builds in sort of a lot size. 60-foot setback creates a pretty good sized lot. And of course, it's all adjustable. If there's problems that are obvious that come up, I think it's easy to revisit.
And we had talked, but I can't recall if this made it into the agreed ordinance, closer to your own residence than the neighbor for all 3 tiers.
Yeah, closer to your own residence than your neighbor's residence, similar to our pig keeping ordinance that we have. Public comment.
I live in the 1st District, and I'm very much in favor of medical marijuana. And just to let you know, when I moved here 10 years ago, I didn't know diddly squat about marijuana. Now I know what it looks like, what it smells like, how to grow it, how to trim it, and I've even baked marijuana brownies. So I'm a little bit more educated than I was 10 years ago. This sounds very well thought out, so I give you a thumbs up for that. And please get it done as soon as possible. I personally do not like the smell of marijuana. So anything you can do to prevent it from permeating my household or my properties, I would appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you. Well said. All right.
Paul, sorry that I was taking so long.
Oh, that's okay. That's okay. I wasn't retroactively scolding you, just going forward.
That's okay. I saw you. I wanted some clarification. So when you're talking about in the backyard, are we talking about a fenced area that's locked in the backyard, or is it just the property that's locked up? Because my concern would be for, say, the family might be okay if they have children, you let your kids run around, they grow up with it, they're going to learn. But neighbor kids are going to come over. Those families might have a different opinion. Those kids are going to be coming up against some of those same issues. So that would be my concern, is to also think of the other people in the community who might be visiting those residences, and those families might have a different opinion. The other thing is, with the fencing, I would rather it be something natural, like wood, that you can't see behind it, instead of the sheet stuff that you see in Oregon and Washington. I mean, I took a long trip this year, went all the way up to Canada, and that's all I saw was sheets everywhere, and it's ridiculous. I mean, it just looks like trailer trash. That would be my only comment.
Right, I think that was part of the idea with being leery about coming right in with a fencing requirement, because that's what happens. You get putting up whatever looks worse than the plants themselves, and so I guess, I'm not an expert in this, but how the county defines specific fencing requirements seemed like a bit of a burden to get into, but from my recall, that's what I remember. The not being in public view is a state thing. Whether your neighbors can see it or not isn't regulated by the state. That would have to be something that would be in the, on the county's shoulders. And then the locked space in terms of, I think most people are going to, the idea is that people would protect their gardens, if from theft, just ordinarily, but maybe not necessarily. And yeah, how to protect, somebody else's kids from coming in and having access, but also the idea that a living plant it's not as dangerous as, say, extracted components of that plant, access to a child. Just a living plant isn't really dangerous to a child directly. But that's my opinion. I suppose somebody else could have a different opinion about whether or not a live plant is dangerous to children. But good points, and not obvious. There's no obvious solution to those issues, definitely. How to balance one person's right to cultivate and the next person's right to not be bothered by the nuisance of that action. That's why this requires all this discussion. So, thank you. Public comment.
Dave Mason, resident of the county. So, having a little bit of enforcement experience, okay, a lot, I'd just say that requiring written permission, not notarized because that's excessive, but written permission from the property owner for it to be there at the property, in the event it's inspected or there's a complaint or whatever, it's nice to just say, yeah, you have that, great, we're good to go. Or you say the landlord says you do, but does he really? Because this looks like you're tearing up his place the way you're doing it. Because those are the kind of complaints that come in. People that aren't causing problems, you don't get a complaint. People that are causing problems, that's where the complaints come from. So if you have that as a requirement, that expedites and makes it easier for staff to keep everybody within the bounds that you guys are trying to set here. The second thing is, as far as a locked area, greenhouses are real easy to throw a padlock on. And there's already a standard for pool fencing in the building code. You can just reference that because that addresses the issue. It doesn't address the visibility, but it addresses the security. So you can just say fence consistent with a pool fence or whatever, just reference the standard, and then you don't have to reinvent the wheel.
All right, thank you. And then just the thing with the written permission from landlord did come up. I'm not asking you to comment again on it, but you can if you want to. But I was going to ask maybe Joel or somebody, because we talked about that and whether or not they wanted to get into it. And I'm not a lawyer and don't know it all forwards and backwards, but they did have some good answers to that specifically. So maybe we'll ask.
It was just my humble opinion.
Yeah, thank you, appreciate it. So I remember talking about that, and there wasn't a response to that, so maybe we can get that again. Let's get the staff to respond to the thing that Dave said about the written permission, and then we'll get back over to you again.
I don't particularly love the idea of staff enforcing people's relationships with their own landlord. If these 6 plants are in compliance in every single way, but you don't have permission from your landlord, then what are we enforcing besides your agreement with your landlord? I don't know, if Heidi thinks it's a useful tool to have that in addition. It's an easy thing to pull and enforce, but, code enforcement has enough to do without policing people's landlord-tenant problems.
I would like to weigh in on that. And I'm going to just say this, it doesn't matter what enforcement, the reason we would require that is to protect the landlords. And so I'm an advocate for written permission. That it guarantees the landlord had a chance and an opportunity to weigh in. And I believe that would be sound policy in an ordinance. And it puts the burden on the leasee or the grower or whatever to get that done and get that accomplished. So if we get into a situation on down the line way beyond normal policing, I don't think that written permission would mean that the county or anyone or the sheriff or anyone has to go get that and verify that on a normal basis. But if some circumstance happens, then they could request it and the grower or the tenant would have to produce it. So it puts the burden where it belongs. That's how I look at it.
All right, some public comment on that.
Well, just quickly, before we go too far from that. I guess my view of that is, and I don't think we do, because I don't have one, well, I guess I don't rent either. We don't have written permission to have dogs and cats at our home. And we have and dogs and cats can do a lot of damage to one's home. I would venture to guess maybe more than growing a plant in the backyard, but that's not a requirement by the county that we, as a renter, would be required to have such permission. And so, you know, to have these now 6 plants, which are deemed as law in the state of California and as our right as California residents, it seems to go a little bit far if we're going to say you're required to have. This would be more of, in my opinion, more of something that as a landlord you'd want to be taking into account. You'd want to be putting it into your lease agreement. And every new lease agreement that comes as of today, you know, you should be having these in your lease agreements. Just like you have no dogs, no pets. It should be no cannabis, right? And that's just my 2 cents on it, that we shouldn't be interjecting and writing ordinances that say you are required to get these permissions, when we don't do these things for all other things. We don't require these.
I'm sorry to keep you waiting, Donna.
That's
And I'd
okay.
just like to reiterate, and I feel the same way, you know, and that the taxes are going to go down and all. And it's because people that use cannabis are going to be refused to be seen as a second-class person. And these good people do have dogs and cats, you know, but they probably don't have pot. And so, you know, I'd hate to see the government kind of enforcing, you know, things for landowners, you know. Of course, if somebody violates your lease, you know, you have some ways to remedy that. But you know, I believe that the tenant should respect the lease, but I don't believe it's really, you know, I don't believe our county has the time, or I don't think it would be a, you know, a wise ethical thing to do to try and enforce the leases between the tenant. Just ditto on Kurt.
Yeah, and just, sorry, Donna, but just really quickly, I think Aaron had mentioned also something about educating the real estate agents, or at the last meeting, we had talked about the written permission from a landlord, and there was
Built
just-
into the culture.
Yeah, it seemed like just a general agreement that, you know, it should be something that was left up to the landlord to decide, and that maybe from a county standpoint, I don't exactly remember what Aaron had said, but that, you know, there could be some direction or some education to the, you know, to the property management companies and the real estate agents in the area to, you know, try to implement something like that in a standard lease agreement that tend to be used around. So that's just I certainly don't think the county should get into, you know, verifying lease agreements and written consent from landlords. It can get pretty sticky.
Okay, I'm on. I agree with you, Blake, and I'll tell you why. I've been a landlord for over 40 years in 3 different states, and we have no smoking policy in our lease agreements, and we have addendums that include if you want a pet or not, okay? And I would appreciate having something in an ordinance that says that the tenant has to notify the landlord, because oftentimes tenants won't notify you when they bring a pet in or they're smoking in the house, okay? So we want to have as much ammunition to get rid of them, if it comes to that, possible. So I would be more inclined, I wouldn't like to have to pay more for code enforcement, but I understand that you're going to have code enforcement on this. I would appreciate having an ordinance that includes that the tenant has to notify the landlord, just from a personal business perspective. Thank you.
The people at home can't hear you on the live stream. We got a portable mic here, and Jay will hustle it over. Thanks. The mic doesn't pick it up for the live stream internet thing.
The way they deal with this in LA and San Diego is you have to have an 8-foot fence. You have to have it in a greenhouse. You can't grow it outdoors in your yard where it's visible. You have to have a locked door on your greenhouse, and this is all basically for consideration of children, like you were talking about. So they can't get into the greenhouse, they can't view it, the neighbors don't have to view it, they don't have to tolerate it if they don't want to. And it's pretty cut and dried, and it's worked for them. LA started out that way. Now, they won't let you grow in greenhouses. You have to grow indoors in LA. And they want you to contact the sheriff's department so that they can come by and they can justify and see how, if you're doing it properly and according to the guidelines that are set down. And that's how that works down there, and it's been working fantastic down there. So, thank you again for your time.
Thank you, thank you.
Should I-
Yeah, just to that, I think one idea here with not, we didn't want to necessarily force it inside, I think was the idea. If you, there's an idea, or there's an allowance for counties to be able to restrict it outside completely, even on the personal level, but then it forces it inside is the idea and creates kind of more issues. And so that was, I think that was one of the ideas of allowing at least some regulated outside. Yeah. All right, thank you.
So, I think Kurt made some great arguments there, and, I can see that side, and I can go both ways on that, and Robert weighed in. But I'm going to go back to my original stance, and if we're going to compare this to dogs and cats and smoking, then I would also work those three things into the ordinance. That's where I'm coming from. All right? So what's wrong with our society as I see it is we have this, entitlement attitude that's been creeping up and hitting us in the face over the last decade or two, to where everybody thinks they have a right to tell me how to farm, how to handle my land, how to do this, how to do that. And I don't like that. I really don't like it at all. And so I own about 30 houses in a couple counties, 3 counties, I guess, or 4. And it's a problem. As a landlord, it's a problem. Most of the folks that live in our houses are employees, but we have agreements with them. I'm telling you from an experienced point of view that I believe that this would be sound policy to require written permission, put that burden on the leasee. It gives the authorities control or leverage when they need it. They don't need to use it in normal, everyday, every year circumstances, but it puts the authority where it belongs, because a lot of landowners might miss this in their agreement, and their agreements are already in place, and they've got leasees, tenants that have been there for a year or 10 years or 20 years. They're not going to go rewrite it now because we have a new industry in town, if you will. And so I'm advocating for it. I think it's sound policy.
I actually understand, and you made some very valid points that I hadn't actually thought of. I own a house that I rent to. Luckily, I've been a very fortunate landlord in that respect. But I would tend to ask Joel and the staff, what would the impact be from something like that? If that were literally in place in an ordinance, what do you guys foresee the impact being to staff, to potential litigation that may come up as we get involved in personal lease
My
agreements?
personal fear is that landlords are going to call code enforcement on their own tenants instead of taking them to court like they should as 2 parties in a contract. That's my problem.
May I just add to that? I mean, if we receive a complaint regarding a nuisance on a property, ultimately it's a property owner who's going to be hearing from us, not necessarily the person who's renting. I mean, they may be our first point in contact, but it's going to land back with the property owner, so.
Have we heard, the gentleman over here had mentioned that, there's counties in the state that are actually requiring that in some of their personal ordinances. Have we had any feedback from that? Do we know anything about any existing litigation that may have come up because of that currently, or?
I don't know anything about that. I mean, it's common to have if you want to operate a business out of your home, it's standard to get landlord permission. This is not a business. There's a little bit more of an entitlement. Where litigation's going to go as far as what's a reasonable requirement is still to be determined. I don't know if this one really bothers me as a lawyer. Would I be worried about this? Probably not. But who knows? Who knows?
So if we included a landlord permission and included the county in this, code enforcement would be the one responsible?
Well, any violation of the county code is, enforced by code enforcement ultimately.
I think, Dave, would you mind? What was the budget for the code enforcement department when you were working?
Okay, so, I think, probably the CAO would be a better person to ask about budget, because I don't want to get into the dollars and cents of the budget. Let me just say that for enforcement, these type of things are handled administratively, okay? So that means the person in violation gets the notice, if you're not in compliance, you have this much time to get in compliance. And if you don't, then penalties begin. Unlike criminal, where you're arrested, you're booked, and then you go to court and all that, that's not what that's about. So having, say for example, you have a complaint. The plants are yada yada, the fence is too short, or the thing ain't locked, or whatever. It goes, okay, number one, do you have permission from the landlord to do this? Yes or no? No. Okay, get permission from the landlord within so many days, or stop doing it.
But as far
But
as
that would be the enforcement part. So now the tenant's got to go to his landlord, I want to grow plants, and then the landlord is like, I didn't know you were growing plants, or whatever, right? And then they can work it out amongst themselves. If it continues without the permission, then notice goes to the landlord, either give him permission or make him stop.
But as far as the county's resources, would it be fair to say that your budget was less than your salary?
Well,
As
that,
far as,
the salary is included in the budget, but
Right.
you're talking about the nuisance
money you
abatement
have down,
fund.
right.
Okay, so I think people get confused about that because there's a fund to pay for
Oh, so-
hiring contractors to actually do abatements, knock down houses, haul off trash, that sort of thing.
Do you guys have the resources to put more on your plate?
Can I interject real
Again,
fast?
I can't.
Yes, please,
comment on that.
interject.
Heidi is the person most knowledgeable and,
Yeah, I'm responsible for preparing the code
Yeah.
enforcement budget each year, and I have been for probably 5+ years,
So
so.
she'd be a
I'm sorry
better
to waste
person to
your
ask
time.
those
Are
questions.
you asking how much money we have for professional services
I'm
in order
asking
to
if-
clean
if
up
This is going to
properties?
cost more money. Do you guys have a surplus right now?
That's fair to say. No, we do not have a surplus now. I mean, are we asking whether or not we would have, the cost of doing additional
I'm really asking a loaded
complaints?
question, is,
Yeah.
where are the
Yeah, it's a loaded
resources?
question. You're trying to get Dave to say, we don't really have the resources to do it, and I admit it,
Yeah.
which he's not going to do.
Well, delivery through my loaded.
Robert, just putting something like this in an ordinance isn't exactly going to cost any money at all. It's the fact of, and then how you go about enforcing it. So what I'm hearing is, essentially this would be used as, if there was a complaint, you would go to the residents and, okay, do you have permission? Because that's required in the ordinance, right? And so when they didn't have permission, that's when it could potentially funnel into more costs, because like I said, the landlord could be using the county as an avenue to move their tenant out as opposed to the normal eviction process. But one question that I have, which I've never really, I guess we haven't really talked about necessarily, is there something else in county code which is requiring landlord-tenant permission, written landlord-tenant permission to be on hand, but, outside of a lease agreement? I can't think, other than a business, right? Like we talked about that, obviously, a business to business, but is there some particular personal item, because, I'm thinking cats, dogs,
It would be an
Plants.
activity more than an item.
an activity, possession of something. Is there something else in any county code anywhere within this county that's required similarly?
Okay, so for anything that requires a permit, you have to have permission from the property owner.
No, non-permitted things.
So building permit or.
Non-permitted
sort of thing.
things, I think was the question.
If you want to have a dog kennel license, you have to get permission from property owner. So in the civil code, there's a section that allows tenants to just have a vegetable garden. But marijuana is excluded from that. So it leaves this kind of, well, is it something that they're entitled to, or are they not entitled to? Is it kind of a vague thing. This just having it just clarifies it, makes it crisp, clean, easy, and then it's not a tool for the landlord to use the county to evict the tenant, because county doesn't evict tenants unless the building's falling down.
Well, here's the point I'd like to make
It
on all of
goes
this.
back on the owner, says either give
Sure,
him permission or make
sure.
him stop. That's your job,
Right.
you're the owner.
So there's already a mechanism, you know, if somebody violates, if my tenant violates our lease agreement, I have all the power in the world to take care of that. It's not, I don't need additional powers. But the notification thing is an issue.
Yeah, and so, let me just throw another thing. So if you give written permission to your tenant, even though it's not in your lease, now you can't evict him for growing it because you gave him written permission. Just saying, it
Sure,
makes it clean,
Yeah, and
that's
so
all.
to continue with my idea, I think that, so I have tools already to evict a tenant from my house if they violate my lease agreement. However, the notification thing is an issue if I don't already have that on my lease agreement, and then the tenant decides not to notify me. You know, I don't know the law forward and backwards about what it takes to amend a lease agreement, honestly. I don't know if I can ask my tenant to re-sign a lease agreement in the middle of the lease. Like, let's say we're a month into the lease and I say, you know, now I want to add something to the lease. I want to add no cannabis to the lease. I may not be allowed to do that. So I get that. But on the other hand, if I'm a tenant or if I'm a landlord and I have a tenant, it should be my right to allow that tenant to cultivate cannabis without me writing written permission. I should not be required to give express permission to my tenant to cultivate cannabis, right? I should be able to look the other way.
Yeah.
If I don't want to put my name down on a contract that's giving permission to somebody to cultivate cannabis, a federal crime, by the way, I should retain that right in the county. The county should not force me to grant permission to a person to exercise their state right.
So I have a question for Dave real quick, and that's a good point Jesse just made, possibly. And I guess my question to you is, it's back to Robert's somewhat loaded question in regards to cost. I foresee this as a potential efficiency piece that would lower cost, not add cost, if we had this written
That's really the
requirement
only
in
reason
there.
why I recommend
Okay.
it, because in my experience, it would just make it
It
easier and simpler.
simplifies.
Yeah.
Very good, thank you.
Public comment?
Yeah, please. I just thought of something really quick. How about rewriting it in a way that is going to make some kind of ordinance, but get the county, release the county from enforcing it? So rewriting in a way that only the property owner has the right to grow this and grant it to their leasees. Period, end of story. That way, they don't have to enforce the code, but everybody understands the property owners can only grant that to their leasees.
That's an interesting idea. I'm not sure how it works technically, but I get the concept, yeah. Public comment over there in the corner. Sure, yeah. Well, just to be clear, we're not talking about collectives or cooperatives, and we're talking about individual grows where people probably aren't going to come in to get busted. We're just talking about nuisance abatement. Sure, sure. Public comment.
Russell Enriquez, thank you guys for your time. I just got a quick question. It's probably a dumb question, because all this talk for the personal exemption is about square footage. Are we still talking about 6 plants maximum? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, that's a state maximum. The state set that within Prop 64 as a 6-plant
Yeah.
personal cultivation, you cannot sell, you cannot transfer, you cannot do anything other than
Right.
use them for your personal self.
Yeah, it's separate from, you don't need a doctor's recommendation for those 6 plants.
And which this has all been in effect since for a year and some now.
And so probably the other part of that question that people ask is the medical versus the recreational commingling, are the plant counts different for medical recommendation versus not? I don't have all the answers for that, but other counties are addressing that by not talking about numbers of plants and kind of leaving that up to you, right? So if you don't have a doctor's recommendation, then the state law says you can only have 6 plants. If you do have a doctor's recommendation, then you can have 6 mature plants and 12 immature plants. It's in the state law. But then there's a qualification for the number of plants that your doctor recommends that you need for your situation. So that's sort of a gray zone, but as far as doctor recommending how much you need, that's a lot more strict than it used to be. You have to have a doctor who's actually going to come to court with you. So it's not clear where it's criminal protection and where it's civil protection. It's new, these additions where 215 stuff came into the law with Prop 64. But counties right now, or other counties are dealing with it just by not specifying the plant count. They're talking about square footage, period. You fit your garden within this square footage, and the plant count is less of a concern. If you don't have a doctor's recommendation, then it's very clear, it's 6 plants only. If you do have a doctor's recommendation, then the number of plants, I think, is a little less clear at this point. But it doesn't affect the county's ability to regulate every other aspect of it, the space and everything, which I think is really what matters. It's the space that matters for your impact.
So we get, just back to Blake, but you mentioned are you suggesting we open the scope of what we suggest to apply to tobacco, cats and dogs as well? You kind of mentioned.
Well, if you guys want to keep talking cats and dogs, then I would be in favor of limiting that to written permission by the plan. That's not the point, that's not our mission, that's got nothing to do with anything we're doing. So let's get that off the table.
Okay, excellent.
I guess I'll weigh in on with my opinion as to how I feel about a written landlord lease thing. I'm torn both ways. I own a house that I rent. Again, I'll say I've been very fortunate. I've had very good renters, but I do know that there are people out there that don't have very good renters. I again, just kind of on the back and forth end of it, I just don't know what the legality standpoint is for us as a county to require something like that. If we currently don't have any specified code in regards to that from personal respect, is this overstepping our bounds? Is this something that we could be leading ourselves into a, situation that, we don't want to get into? On the counter end of that, I think that, again, code enforcement will only be called into a situation like this if there is a nuisance call, correct? It's not, again, we're not dealing with an enforcement aspect where the county's going and checking every garden. So in that respect, I don't know if, how many times this is going to become an issue. I think that, as I talk more about it, I feel like we should probably have something in there that puts the onus back onto the leasee and the landlord agreement. If I were against cannabis, I would educate myself. First off, let's talk about educated landlords. Donna had mentioned that, she's got properties that, and most people don't know. Well, I think the onus, in that respect, when a landlord owns a piece of property they never checks on his leasees, well, whose fault is that? It's not the county's fault. It's not anybody else's fault other than his fault or their fault. So, I think we need to back off of that and really think about, how does this affect the county and the staff? And how does it affect the personal ordinance? I don't think it's going to be a huge deal to implement something like this. So I would tend to just lean toward the cautious end of that and see how we can work something in there that does, imply that you need some sort of permission. It just makes sense.
Yeah. I guess I just want to add something, and this is the way I understand an ordinance. we can't do anything that undermines federal or state or other laws, but we can require anything we want. We could have a county ordinance that said everybody has to paint their house blue.
No, you can't do that, I don't think.
No, he's over there's nodding yes. We can have silly stuff like that, that's my point. So
Really? We can have a county ordinance that said everybody in the county has to paint their house blue? I think
Or-
that's totally unconstitutional. That's crazy.
You would be correct, but we can have it. And we can have county ordinance that say everyone has to have a Victorian house that lives in the town of Ferndale. There are things like that. That's what we're talking about here. It's kind of we as a group of citizens that live here in Delaware County want to live under these conditions. I didn't take my hand and go down, I took it up. We can supersede, we can go higher, we can require more. And more can be stupid, or it can be smart. Okay, so we're trying to define smart here now, and that's what I'm talking about. I'm just trying to put this in context. Yes, we have a legal right to do it, and yes, it makes sense, and yes, it protects kind of the unaware property owner, if you will. The one that really has fallen through the cracks. Not the ones that are in the room, not the ones that are paying attention. That's what we're talking about. And I'm going to submit that it really gives the authorities in the time of need clarity and leverage.
So, we've been saying this isn't going to cost any money, and it does make sense to require this permission, but Jesse made a good point too. As a property owner, he doesn't want to be forced into signing his name on something that is federally illegal, right? Giving permission to cultivate.
Or for any reason. If
Or for
I just
any
don't
reason.
feel like
But
it, I
so-
don't want to, I don't care, it's
So
my
when this
right.
boils back to the county's end, I could see how this could cause a huge issue on the county end. So the county has an ordinance that requires landowner, renter, rentee permission. So, here's an example. The renter doesn't wants the county steps in, there's an issue. You don't have your written permission. Well, the landlord doesn't want to give it. And the landlord doesn't care if the rentee continues to do it.
And then nobody
And so
cares
then-
except for the county.
So the only person that's going to be in conflict then is the county, and now the county is forced by code to enforce this for which the landowner will not. And so then the county is forced to step in and do A, B, and whatever these measures are, it's forced by code, by the county, to do something, whereas the landowner won't do it and the rentee won't stop doing it unless the county steps in. And that's just the opposite spectrum of that, right?
I would say 90% of all laws fall into that exact same.
No, it doesn't change your argument at all, other than the fact that your argument is based on wanting to protect the landowner. And to some extent, right?
No, my argument, again, I think I'm clear on this. My argument is about, we are here to draw boundaries around the process of growing and utilizing and selling and, marijuana in this county on behalf of our citizens, on both spectrums, right? That's where I'm coming from. It's not about, I was giving you the landowner's perspective earlier just because I thought it needed to be in there. This isn't about me and my house out there or whatever that's rented out. This is about what I believe is better for our community, better for our authorities, that both county, the sheriff's department, and everyone involved in the judicial system. It's going to give clarity on down the line when problems happen, and then send signals to the folks that are wanting to grow plants that they better think twice. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's what an ordinance is to put some, again, boundaries, parameters, and I believe this is a good one worth fighting for.
I would just say, for all of us and everybody in the room, take away your property ownership. If you have 30 homes and thousands of acres in several counties, take that away, because the average person here makes between $10,000 and $22,000 a year. They're not in the room, they're at McDonald's and they'll be at the gas station later on, And so, you know, and back to, I'm sorry, we do have to talk about dogs and cats. That's a far more destructive resource, and landowners have representation. I ran for office in District 1. One of my 3 debates is the realtors put on. You know, they've got plenty of representation as a landowner. The people who don't have any representation in this community, you know, are the working poor. And so it's a personal matter. It's a private matter between you and your tenant. Just like when we bailed out AIG and Citibank, that was a matter between AIG and their debtors, and it wasn't a matter between us and the taxpayers. And you as a business person, that's what you are when you're renting a home. You're going to have to do your due diligence. This morning, my windows got broken out at Tidal Wave 101, the little tie-dye shop. That's a risk I take on. I can't ask the town, despite the fact, you know, I could say, you know, law enforcement, maybe it's not pulling it off. They don't have the resources, whatever I can come up with. The end thing is it's my business. I'm going to have to replace the glass. I can't ask, you know, somebody else to do that for me. And if you rent to somebody who destroys your home, you really can't default to the community for protection, you know. That's my opinion.
So I think maybe what Blake could be looking for is, how do you get rid of the pot grower when you didn't get the ordinance, you didn't get your lease in place? You know, and you're in the middle of a lease and you can't change it, and you got somebody renting your place who's growing pot and you don't want them to. What's your recourse? Is that what you're getting at?
Actually, no, I don't think of it that way at all. I guess my example of owning homes is probably out of line, shouldn't have talked about it. Where I'm coming from, it truly is looking at the authorities in the room and giving them leverage. All right?
Leverage to do what exactly?
To work efficiently and quickly.
To do what exactly, though? Like a specific example.
Code enforcement officer made this recommendation to us, Dave did. And I'm trusting that he knows what he's talking about. And then when I followed up with the question about, doesn't this ultimately bring efficiency to the system, the answer was yes, right?
I just want to hear a specific example, because I get the general concept of how this brings efficiency, but short of a specific example, I can't process.
So a grower with six plants gets out of line, and the sheriff or somebody has to go visit and do a visit, and then...
What do you mean by gets out of line, specifically?
Breaks a rule or a law.
Then they're already out of line, and the plants are already gone, they've broken the rules, got nothing to do with this agreement.
No, it has nothing to do with growing marijuana. Just when there's a visit from...
For a visit for what reason specifically?
Any reason other than being in compliance with the laws.
So you can't have a visit if you're in compliance. That's the whole thing. So you want them
We're
to
not
be able to
talking
visit.
about marijuana for the visit.
Well, we are talking about marijuana. That's why I want to know. Like, you're talking about for a visit for another reason, like a visit for a party over noise late
Exactly.
night. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so then they come upon a compliant garden.
Yeah, just any reason that they might have to do with somebody who has, maybe it's just been complaints, neighboring complaints, right? Like sound, noise, whatever. And so this just gives one quick check that, you know, do you have permission for that? Do you have permission for this?
But what about the thing that they came there to address? I don't think law enforcement wants to come to address a call and then have to find something else to deal with the problem because they can't deal with the call that they came
I think
for.
we're going too deep here now.
That's what it's about, is kind of what it sounds like.
Well,
So I wanna know-
just to point out, you know, I don't think law enforcement is going to care about the civil ordinance about landlord permission, right?
Correct.
It's going to be code enforcement, and, you know, that's Heidi. You know, do you think this helps? Do you think this hurts? Do you want this? Is this going to give you leverage you want? Is this just another thing in the code that people are going to complain we're not enforcing? What do you think? Do you see the value in this? Is this something that's going to help your staff do its job?
I mean, it would be in a combination of other issues that were going on. But I could see it just being us becoming more involved in renter-landlord issues, which we already are involved in that too much, and it rarely has to do with the issue that we're brought on the scene for. That's it for me.
Well, I guess for me, I would tend to just lean with the county and allow them to explain to us what they think it would do. You know, I clearly hear from Heidi that she thinks it would probably at some point end up being a burden. So you know, I'll just say it right now. I feel like we just are kind of beating down the wrong path, and maybe we should move forward. You know, at some point, if, you know, I mean, obviously these ordinances can be changed, and they can be modified. If those become issues, and the county needs another tool, we can revisit that at some point. But you know, at this point, I think we might just be a little early on trying to get into landlord leasee situations.
I agree, but I also don't want to ignore what Blake is saying, because it's a point, and we're on it now, and it's one of the hangups, I think, for moving this forward.
Yeah.
And so I do want to,
Yeah.
I want to get to the bottom of it, and I'm not trying to grill you out of disrespect.
No,
I hope
you're
you're
fine.
cool with it, but I do want to, I want to analyze where it's coming from, because oftentimes the fear is that these things, it's not about the issue, it's about something else. It's about a personal issue that ends up being used
Sure.
dishonestly, sort of, in a way.
So, you know, Dave, please come to the mic. I'm thinking, I'm only advocating for this because I heard from Dave this morning. I don't know Dave, I've never met him personally, but I do have notes from the last 3 times he spoke, and he's never mentioned written, but when he mentioned it today, it resonated with me, and it made a lot of sense. And so I'm here kind of caught off guard trying to defend that on his behalf. That's what this is about.
I agree with you too, Blake.
We've had time to talk about it
yeah.
too before it, so.
Okay.
Got it, okay. Let me just throw this out because it'll clear it up for you. So, had a lot of cases over the years where there were tenant-landlord disputes, and it was never about what they were complaining about, it was always about some other issue. So I had a case in town locally where a tenant had a 215 garden in his garage, essentially. And he wasn't a very good gardener, they're pretty sickly-looking plants. But the landlord wanted to make an issue out of, he's turned my place into a drug house, and I don't want that. No, code enforcement's got to rescue me from my tenant. And the tenant's like, no, the electrical doesn't work, and the cable fell down, the window leaks, and the bathtub doesn't work, and he's a bad landlord, and you have to hammer him so I can stay here rent-free. I mean, that's really what it was, you know. And so, and then it was, oh, he's retaliating against me because I have this medical condition and I have this thing, and because of that. It's like, you know, if you got written permission to have it, it's not an issue. Let's get to the real issue. That's no longer an issue. You can't say that you're being retaliated because you have it, because he gave you permission. So it works both ways. And so you don't have permission, it's like, well, you didn't get permission from the landlord before you dug up the fresh sod he just put down and planted these plants in the backyard. I can understand why he'd be pissed. So, you know, you guys need to work that amongst yourselves, because having the plants, it's not really a violation, but you really should have got permission. It just makes it a little bit cleaner. When you're dealing with issues, it takes it out of the equation. It doesn't add things to it, because in reality, if there's a problem and the landlord's willing to give permission, okay, let's address the problem. If it's just, oh, he didn't give me permission and there's no other problem, it's like, well, then why am I here? Because I'm not doing permission checks. I don't really want to get into permission check. That's like waste of time, right? There's no benefit to it. But it makes it cleaner, and so everybody knows what they're supposed to be doing when you start off, instead of saying, well, you know, I have the right to farm because there's an ordinance that applies in Smith River and I'm in, you know, Klamath, and
I think
therefore
unless you
should.
notarize these permission slips, though, they're kind of meaningless. I can generate a permission slip from my landlord who spends, you know, 3 years at a time in Bogota, you know, and you're never going to get a hold of them, you know, and so I got a permission slip, you know, so it's, I don't know.
Well, it cuts that tenant-landlord squabble back and forth trying to use code enforcement as a hammer. It's like either you gave them permission or you didn't. Right? And if you didn't, then it's on you to enforce your rights as a landlord. Make them stop.
I think any landlord in the state of California now that isn't thinking about this is pretty stupid. So, I mean, if you own a home in the state of California right now and you're not thinking about installing something in your own lease, you better get with the picture.
And there's civil code and case law is abundant with people that don't have agreements. They have a handshake, a wink, and a nod, and that's it. Right. But more common are the tenant-landlord fights. They're arguing over something else. It's got nothing to do with what they're complaining about, and that just takes it out of the equation, just so you can get to the problem of what's going on. That's all.
Yes, and/or it adds to the issue, because if the landlord is mad at the tenant, and the county has something on file that says you have to have this, well, the landlord uses the county ordinance to get rid of his tenant because he
That's
didn't
right.
simply write a piece of paper. So, I mean, I guess that argument can go both directions, right? Like,
I could use that as a reason to get rid of my tenant for something that otherwise wouldn't be a legal cause to get rid of them. And so then I can come in and say, I rescind that permission, or I never gave it to you, or whatever. And I think it gives the landlord a tool to do something, to take action for reasons that aren't legitimate. And that's dangerous, I think. I get what you're saying, elevate things, right? There's lots of ways to, I think, I hate to use this extreme example, but Hitler was trying to elevate Germany in his opinion, and he took it too far. And so obviously that's not what this is. That's an extreme example.
Well,
but I think that in the interest of elevating things, we also have to think forward and be legal and be constitutional and realize this isn't prostitution. This isn't other illegal activity. Yes, it's illegal federally, but we have to operate under the, California laws. And
you made another
California.
really good point, Jesse, about just essentially forging a permission slip, right? I mean, if this is going to be in our ordinance as a county, then probably the county needs to come up with a form that it's filled out under, because if you walk in and say, where's your permission slip? Well, here, let me write it real quick here. He said it was okay, right? Like, and then the county walks away. Well, then the landlord comes back to the county and says, I never gave him permission and you didn't verify that that was my signature. So, it just seems like we're going down a path that we haven't gone down before as a county.
If you're going to go to this level, you might as well require permits too. And I thought we made a decision as a group, well, we didn't want to do that. We wanted to establish performance standards that were straightforward. People could abide by them, hopefully move on and do their business, and everyone will be happy.
There's already a lawsuit, one or two going on about permits being excessive, not in the scope of reasonable regulation. And there's
Yeah.
a lawsuit currently about it.
I'm trying to listen to everybody and kind of take it all in and weigh this thing out. And I'm certainly not one that would ever want to advocate for more bureaucracy and more requirements and more things that would be burdensome, to, I guess, everybody on both sides. And so, I kind of get it. I think I hear y'all. Some of you are kind of in the middle. I think I'm somewhat in the middle. I'm trying to protect one side. But if we need to if I need to give in to move on, then let's do that. If y'all want to vote on it, that's fine too. But I think we just need to function by consensus here and move on. And so I'm ready to move on.
I think also we should boil back, the staff is really a good point. I'm not hearing from the staff that it's something that they either want to do or feel strongly about.
I'll weigh in on this a little bit as far as the dog issues go, because it is fairly similar. I know we were trying to get away from that, but it's a similar model, and we get calls daily, and they're very time-consuming, people trying to put us in the middle of landlord-tenant disputes. I'm thankful that our department is not obligated by ordinance to get in the middle of that. If there's a humane issue, if there's another county ordinance that's being violated, sure, and it's the same thing with code enforcement. If there's an electrical issue or whatever the case may be, substandard conditions, they'll get involved. But it's much better not to allow people to drag us into those disputes. It's really time-consuming to parse out what's going on, and even hear people out till you can get a word in edgewise to tell them, whoa, we don't do that, is time-consuming.
Well, I hear what you said, and I get it in the interest of moving on, and that's fine with me. But I think also it's obviously it's a worthwhile topic to talk about, the idea of making sure that landlords know what's going on in their house. I think that's sort of the bottom line. When it all boils down to it, is we all want to make sure that landlords know what's going on in their house, and it's okay with them. They're granting permission for that. That's obvious. How we do that, I think, maybe remains to be seen. So I want to not drop this subject. I'd like Blake said, be able to move forward with getting an ordinance down the pipe. But I think it's important to put down in our notes to keep talking about this general idea of how do we, maybe it's not with an ordinance, maybe it's a cultural effort, I don't know, I'm just throwing it out there, but how do we make sure that landlords are notified? How do we make sure that they know? Maybe not make sure, but how do we take steps to address the issue so that the real issue of stuff going on without landlords knowing it is addressed, and it's not used as something else. It's not used as a sideways means of controlling your tenants over an issue that you don't have legal control over ordinarily. So I don't want to forget about it, but I do like the idea of moving forward and then remembering that we can adjust this. We have good ideas. If we learn new things, we can integrate them in.
With the thought of moving forward, and maybe we talk real quickly about this, how is this going to come back to us when it's all written up, maybe at the next meeting, or what's the timeline on that, Joel?
Here's my goal. The next meeting, it'll be all written up. You vote on it. Hopefully, it's unanimous. I'll bring it back without a landlord permission. It's going to go to the planning commission, and then it's going to go to the board. And if there's any changes, it's going to go back to the planning commission. There will be opportunities for the realtor community or the landlord community to make this something that's important. You know, and if the community as a whole really wants this landlord permission, there's opportunities for it to still be considered and added.
So, we're talking written permission. I thought landlord permission was already somewhat agreed on. The fact that we would say landlord permission.
That's what we're talking about, is how do you ascertain landlord permission? That's what we're getting to. Whether or not you require it being written. Obviously, yeah, the idea is you're not doing something that's in violation of what your landlord is saying. I mean, you can already do that. You can put that in your lease.
Yeah, so I kind of
That's
hear what you're
legal.
saying. But we need clarity. So Joel just said that he's not going to write in any landlord permission phrase. I think that's what I heard. However, when you guys were bringing me up to speed earlier, landlord permission was on the table. It was one of the items checked.
Right. It means that, like, the landlord retains their traditional legal right, like you would in the state of California.
We're not going to address that in the ordinance in any way.
Right. It's like you have a legal right to draft your lease agreement however you want, excluding cannabis if you want to, and you retain that right, obviously. Like, the county doesn't have the power to take away a landlord's right, I don't think, to put that into their lease. I think that was the only idea, is that it just, you know, in case there was any lack of clarity with that, the county doesn't have the power to take away a landlord's right. Like, I've heard landlords say that, you know, like, I don't want the county, you know, not allowing me to put this in my lease agreement. I think that might have been a real fear for people, and they don't realize that you can put that in your lease agreement regardless of what county rules are in place. I think that was where that came from.
If it's helpful, Blake, I actually have the email in front of me that you had sent that basically went over everything that we have talked about, kind of listed it out. Would it be helpful to hear that, or do you have that in front of you? I mean, should we read something like that publicly so that people, you know, I mean, it's a fairly quick couple of paragraphs. It just kind of gives a general overview of what we've discussed so that, you know, people are hearing us talk about a lot of these things, but they may not be quite as clear. I mean, we can just read it through. Basically, yeah, sure. I mean, I just have it in front of me. This is the email that you had sent out to the group. It says, we have 3 tiers of outdoor cultivation according to the size of the garden, measured by the square footage of the plant canopy. We have 1 tier for indoor cultivation. All tiers must comply with these state rules. Plants must not be visible by normal, unaided vision from a public space. Plants are in a locked space, and the county will define locked. Plants must be inside a private residence, accessory structure, or upon the grounds of the residence. This means no growing on properties with no residences. Additionally, all personal gardens must be closer to your own house than your neighbor's home. This would be a county rule. The tiers apply to all residences in all zoning districts. The landlord retains the right to restrict cultivation through traditional lease agreements and would not be part of the county code. And then we get into the tiering. So tier 1 is a maximum canopy of 25 square foot, minimum setback of 10 feet from your property line. Plants must be in containers with the idea that they are movable if needed. Maximum total plant height in that tier is 6 feet. Tier 2 is a maximum canopy of 100 square feet with a minimum setback of 40 feet from your property lines. There are no height restrictions or container requirements. Tier 3 is a maximum canopy of 300 square feet, minimum setback of 60 square feet, and no height or container restrictions. Indoor cultivation would be limited to 100 square foot with no further regulations. Any building alterations that would normally require a building permit would be applied for in the usual way, like any legal activity. Both indoor and outdoor cultivation would be allowed concurrently. So that's kind of the general overview of what we're talking about, if anybody out there just was a little bit confused.
So will we have a consensus on that?
Yeah, just a consensus to move that to Joel to get written up, and then we can look at it in real legalese terms, and then we can talk about it again, make sure everything in there is the way we thought it was going to be. We got 12 more minutes if we want to keep this to 2 hours. So we can maybe pick what we want to.
Well, I would suggest we talk about, next meeting and next agenda or goals to
Okay.
accomplish.
Okay.
Should we generally move to the general public comment, just in general on this? Is that what we do here? I don't
know. I mean,
Basically,
whatever-
we've gone
do
through
however.
points 1 and 2, and then,
Sure.
so we're kind of stuck on, do we have enough time to deal with anything?
Right.
And
Well, I think we can
point
get
number
started
3.
on something here in the next 10 minutes. I think that it's, the first thing with the commercial to address would be the retail, at least the existing retail. And that's, I think, an easy compartment to start with. There's lots to talk about just with that. And do it like that. We can get started in that a little bit. But then for our next meeting agenda, I'd like to focus on the discussion around retail cannabis outlets.
Jesse, is it okay if I get a couple minutes? There's one thing for child support services, for people out here, Director of Child Support Services, Aaron Goodwin, that's really important that other county child support agencies are dealing with the for-profit grow operations. And now that we're moving into one, there's something that's really important for the community to understand. There's a family code 17520. That code is in reference to something that's referred to as SLIM's state licensing revocation. So since this is a state licensing that we are requesting that grow operations would comply with, if they're delinquent in child support, more than 30 days, the license will not be issued. If it's at more than 120 days, there'll be a revocation of a current license if one is held. So a lot of other counties are partnering with the co-ops or other grow organizations to try to help people that want to move out of the black market, because it has been a historical issue with our organization and people making money in the black market as a whole, whether it is, in this case, marijuana or anything else. We would like to be able to work with people to help them with this license process, because people have the incentive to not disclose actual income. So we would like to be able to help people. It's just a matter of getting people to have buy-in if they want to be legal.
Yeah, that's great. How would we go about doing that?
I have a lot of discretion as far as these licensing revocation. I have the ability to make suppressions of these orders. So if it's based on willingness of the individual, if there's someone that wants to go into commercial cultivation or distribution, whatever the industry may be, or segment of the industry, if they were to contact the office, if they would show good faith and willingness to work forward, essentially we would work with them as long as they're making actual steps. And again, this is a big one in Humboldt County. Obviously, the director's been working very close with their organizations. But examples of this is orders where non-custodial parents are obligated for a nominal amount of monthly support, when in reality they're making maybe 6 figures plus. So the adjustments all of a sudden telling an NCP, if you want to be legal, well, you were paying $100 a month, now you're going to pay $1,300 a month. That's a big step for people. But if we're trying to get people out of this black market, because ultimately the organization's goal and intent is to take care of children. So it has that element to it.
So would that be something that, I mean, it's not written into an ordinance, it would just be a general partnership between?
Yeah.
But I
so
know it's state law, but in terms of, I
State
mean,
and
how?
federal.
say from the Delmore Growers Association, would that be a partnership with the Child Services to just get that word out to potential?
It would be a one-on-one with whichever agencies and our agency to partner up to say, and other organizations do like amnesty days where it's just saying, let's just talk. We're not going to do any punitive or any type of enforcement. Let's just talk about where you sit right now. How can we get you on track, and what's a good plan? Because I'd rather someone start paying, especially if there's an unemancipated child in the household, to support that child in our community, to support our community as a whole, even if it's making a deal with them for some forgiveness or whatever. We'd have to work that out.
The idea is that if you got child support issues, don't use that as a reason to stay in the black market.
Right. And so that's what part of the ordinance development is, to give them the incentive to come out of the black market, and our organization to be here to say we will work with them if they're forthcoming and eager to do that.
Are there any website links to state information? Maybe we could place that on the one of the grower association, social media pages, kind of start getting some of that out
there's some
there.
flyers that are out there. If you want, I can send that information to your organization. Okay. Yeah, and this applies to all professional licenses, driver's license, hunting licenses, anything that you have a license for. If you're delinquent on child support, we have the ability to revocate it, or do suspension, sorry.
I did not know that. Robert, you want to talk about existing retail or retail in general?
Quickly, just
sorry.
so I know where we're ultimately going, there's going to be retail, then there's distribution, and what else?
I don't know the order of operations exactly, but I was thinking retail is probably because it's what everybody sees, it's what we have. It's they're existing and operating for the most part in the correct zones. They're generating tax revenue.
I'm just looking for the other categories.
Right.
What
And
else?
then I was thinking then existing cultivation operations that are kind of operating under the same model as the retail outlets, that we would consider that next. But we don't have to. The order is not important. I was just thinking in terms of what's most relevant, and that's what's operating currently. So that was the idea behind that. We currently have retail, we currently have cultivation.
And then, is there a distribution
Yeah,
piece?
distribution is
Or
like,
Well, I kind of think of it like 4 pieces, and maybe I'm totally off base
That's what I'm
there.
looking for.
There's distribution, there's cultivation, there's retail, and then there's processing, which I would call the testing and
there's
everything like that.
manufacturing also,
Manufacturing, yeah.
and lab testing.
That's what I was
There's 4 or 5 separate categories. But distribution is sort of a new one. That was something that was just done, by the cultivators and by the retailers. And now it's mandated by the state to be separate. Separate entities. A distributor, right, distributor is the tax collector from the cultivator and from the retail. And they're like the custodian for the product. They do the quality control and the lab testing, and they're responsible for that. So that will be a huge component as the commercial industry goes forward, but we don't have any existing distribution facilities. So it's going to be later in the priority.
Truthfully, I think transport's probably a little bit more important than distribution for us currently, because, if you had, retail space, they've got to get the product to them somehow, some way. You can act as a cultivator, as your own self-distributor, so you can distribute to the retail outlet. So I think just transport's it's a simple process for the transport. I think we could knock it out pretty quickly.
Transport and distribution different in your eyes?
Yes, they are. They're completely different, 2 separate licenses.
Yeah.
Distribution deals with mostly, they're the tax man.
There's
They're
a
the middleman
transport
tax person.
distribution license, which allows you to transport your product from your farm to a distributor.
Yep.
And that's separate. But in terms of the details, I think it's going to be retail, cultivation, and then processing, and then maybe manufacturing.
And I think we kind of talked about it previously, and I've heard from, the board, kind of sounded to me like, and then just the community in general, we have an issue at the current moment with existing retail, essentially. And that's where we need to maybe move forward first, which is where I think we're
Yeah,
headed
I'd
right
like to
now,
see a
trying
mechanism
Trying to
for-
address the existing retail operations and how they're being limited by the fact that there's no ordinance on our books.
Right, so I'd like to see a way to get at least our existing collective associations that are doing retail, the ability to apply for a state license, so that means defining, where they go and all of these sorts of things, how many we have. If we're just going to do existing, that would be maybe existing as of the date of the ordinance, something like that. But should we do a few minutes of public comment? Because we're getting toward the end of the meeting, so let's do a couple of comment, keep it to a minute or less, and then we're going to wrap up our thing.
Hi. Now, I heard the categories. I didn't know, I considered one that I don't know if it falls in any of those. So my thought was hospitality. So if somebody, like I was just thinking of, say, just having a rec ranch like they did in Colorado, up high in the mountains. All they do is come, stay the night, try out various brands.
Like a bed and breakfast, right?
So I'm not sure what that falls underneath. Yeah, so, I mean, it's a
That would be a
perfect spot.
That would be a micro business potential, where you're doing multiple licenses on the same premises, which is something we may consider. I mean, we're definitely going to talk about it because it's something that I'm interested in myself, so
Yeah.
I'm glad you mentioned it.
Okay. Yeah, I just didn't know where that fell under any of those categories.
We're just here to talk about county purview. The city's doing their own thing, and they have a planning commission meeting on February 8th. I don't know the time of that, but that's their third meeting. They're pretty far along.
We do have a city
He's
rep
so
here.
silent. It's hard to remember that he's part of the group. So, but Eric's from the city, and maybe you chime in on that real quick.
So if there's no further public comment.
There is.
Okay,
Come on up.
Sorry.
Happy to be here and thankful for all of you on the board. I'm Patty McCauley. We've had our medical cannabis license distribution since 2006. So we've been in operations for 10 years. We serve Del Norte County. We stay discreet. We are usually just referred by doctors for medical patients. Our current enrollment right now is over 800 plus members. 65% of those members are seniors over the age of 65. Being a previous cancer survivor and battling cancer for 6 years is why I got into this business, is to help serve the community. I respect Robert's opinion and goal to try to be the only recreational facility in Del Norte County, but I disagree with that because...
I'm sorry, Patty, I just meant to point out like I am special interest, So I didn't mean like I really...
Okay.
I was
Okay,
trying-
I just wanted to speak up for our members because it would be a monopoly and we just wouldn't want that to happen.
Yeah, no monopoly
So I
interest
just wanted
here.
to speak for our members that, we do have our state recreational license already. We have been working, the person that Joel was talking about is us. We're not selling recreational because we're trying to be compliant and just stay in good faith with the community and be respectful of that. We're off the grid, we're off on North Crest, we don't have any public thing in the site of the city to hinder anybody that's against medical marijuana. We just try to be really discreet. So, and that's about all I have to say right now. It's RCC, Redwood Coast Collective Patient Resource Center, and we have had our license since 2006.
I've been wondering to put a face to you for a while.
Thank you. Come to the mic so we can hear you and state your name.
On your tier 1, 2, and 3, on your tier 1, 2,
State your name for the...
Thomas Garcia. On your tier 1, 2, and 3, how come that can't work for indoor personal grow also? It can? Okay. why on the outdoor it can be 2,500 or 300 and on indoor it can't?
So
Just curious.
why can't it be larger than 100
Yes.
square feet?
Yeah. I mean,
Yeah, lots, there was quite a
feel like it should be the
conversation.
same,
Yeah, let me
shouldn't
answer. There was quite a conversation about it when at our last meeting.
And part of the setbacks on those tier 1s and 2s and 3s, if you look at them logistically, you'll understand the sizing of the lots that will be required to extrapolate them, and that's part of the point. Part of the point is that you're growing in a house, let's say right out the door right here. You know, you shouldn't have, and this is maybe a cumulative thought here, 1,000 square foot grow in that house right there, that's 1,500 square foot
what
house.
if it's not a personal house and it's commercial?
Then it's a commercial license, and this doesn't apply.
Yeah, this is just personal
Say
growing.
commercial residence, right?
This is solely for having a 6-plant personal thing, and so if you wanted to go larger than this, you would get a license.
Okay.
License, this doesn't apply to any of the commercial
I'm just
licensing
confused,
aspects.
like on the personal tier 1, 2, and 3, you have 300 square feet to canopy, but only 6 plants? Or you're allowed to grow as many plants as you can?
Well, that's part of Prop 64. Part of what Prop 64 brings to you as a resident of the state of California is the ability to grow a maximum of 6 plants. And the county has the ability then to regulate the space in which you grow them in. If you exceed the 6 plants, that's where the commercial licenses step in. And there's some gray area that Jesse was talking about existing 215 ordinances. But to go past 6 plants is essentially a gray area to some extent, but additionally, the other side of it is there's a commercial license requirement. And so that's where the canopy size comes in, because let's say you have a multi-acre piece of property where the larger tier would kick in, and it was 300 square foot. Each plant would be quite large to encompass that 300 square foot, but you could only have 6.
I was just confused on the personal cultivation. I thought that was part of personal, not commercial.
It is, this is all for personal cultivation. The tiers for outside and for inside. I think the short answer on why not go bigger on the inside, indoor growing, is because it gets more complicated. There's more issues. The larger you go on the indoor garden, the more technical things there are. Building a grow room, you're going to get into permits, building code stuff, and it just sort of gets beyond the purview of a simple ordinance.
I'm
And
just
so
wondering if you're capable of doing that, why not?
the county could do tiers for indoor too as well, for sure. But the reason that the tiers for outdoor was because of setbacks that you can meet from your neighbors, the idea of a stinky garden, right? The bigger the garden, the bigger the stink and the more setback you need. Now, if you're inside, you don't necessarily have those setbacks. You'd have to get into the same thing of defining the setback. So let's say you wanted a 300 square foot indoor garden, you'd need a much larger setback from the house because you may or may not be properly filtering your air and generating a lot of stink, just like a 300 square foot garden.
What if you are in compliance, just like you would be on the outdoor, in the indoor?
Yeah, well, the way that this would be written, then it wouldn't matter. It wouldn't matter any of that.
Yeah,
So that would.
I'll throw 2 cents in there. I think, truthfully, if you look at the general layout of homes, most bedrooms, or garages, which are the typical conversion point for an indoor grow space, they're 10 by 10, 10 by 15. If you give somebody the inside space of a 300 square foot, you may be converting more than 1 bedroom, maybe the entire garage, or maybe even trying to get into a kitchen or a bathroom.
You can say you own your own property on a few acres and you do have a warehouse in the back with all the proper setbacks on your own property. Would you be able to do a 300 square foot canopy indoors on your personal property?
Yeah, the county's, not with this particular outline. I think it ends up being too much to manage, too many details to manage. But it's not to say that over the years, the county won't develop something more specific. I mean, that's definitely possible.
It would be any different than an outdoor grow that.
It's way different.
I
Indoor,
know it is different, but I'm just saying, who's saying you're not capable of doing that?
it's not saying that you're not capable. It has to do with how difficult it is for the county to enforce. I think that's the bottom line. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, and again, this is all just 6 plants. This is what this ordinance is regulating, just solely 6 plants.
Let's just get our agenda for next meeting sort of focused and maybe pick a time to shoot for scheduling. Do we want to consider maybe doing meetings at a regular interval, or do we want to keep? I don't mind doing meeting by consensus times. It seems to be working out. If there's one or two people who can't make it, it seems to be working out. So I don't know if
I have no
anybody-
problem with trying to shoot for, 2 weeks, let's say.
Right.
It seems to me like every time we're shooting for this, we're having issues with people not available,
I would like to see it happen a little bit more often, if that were possible with scheduling. I know our schedules are tight.
I'd
but-
like 2 weeks. I just didn't know if we wanted to do like, we just do this like every 2 weeks on a specific date and time and you make it or you can't, or do we want to continue to be flexible?
I don't know, how do you feel, Blake?
I mean, in the interest of what the Board of Supervisors came, directed towards us in their last meeting, at least individual opinions were that we need to meet more regularly.
But that was just an individual opinion from
Yeah.
one board of supervisor. It wasn't a directive from them.
I get it, but, I would like to see us meeting more regularly too. It just, we get a meeting in place and that kind of falls through and then another week boils down,
Right.
We've been shooting for 2 weeks, but it's been more like 3 to 4.
Okay. So,
How do you look 2 weeks out from now?
yeah, decent. I can move around.
All right, let's do it. We don't have our
Are we committed to Wednesdays
here.
or?
Any day of the week's fine with me. It's,
It would be pretty much staff.
staff's a little more,
Specific,
yeah.
week, staff's super busy, and it's not possible to do it, I suppose.
We can set out the poll for the middle of the month, the doodle poll.
Okay, so you said the second 2 weeks from now,
Yeah.
so the week of the
Yeah,
12th? So you're thinking perhaps the 14th?
Or
Sure.
15th or 16th would certainly work better for me.
Oh, yeah,
16th
Valentine's
is a
Day,
county
yeah.
holiday.
It's my daughter's birthday. Can't be here.
Which day?
Valentine's Day.
Oh, okay. That would be the 15th then. How many people can commit to that?
Blake can be chaired. Blake's vice chair, so I don't have to be here.
Hey, I don't want
Well,
that seat.
well, But what does everyone think about the 15th?
Sure, we can make that work.
Yeah, me too.
Joel? Good. Okay. Okay, so 10 a.m. on the 15th.
For the public, that won't be a date certain until we get that agendized and posted. But we'll be shooting for it.
So basically, agenda stuff could be retail, existing nonprofit.
Yeah.
I think we need to start the discussion of taxes too.
Yes, thanks for reminding me. I'm glad you brought that up. Just, we got a couple, well, we're over time, but, yeah, definitely, for our midterm election here in June, getting something on the ballot. I talked about, the square footage, like other counties are doing square footage for outdoor growing, and then, Joel had mentioned just trying to tackle it at a single point of taxation, and, I don't know if Joel wants to talk about that for a few minutes while we're here, just to get our minds, going, and we can think about it before the next meeting.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of a longer conversation, but picking one spot to tax is probably the easiest on both the industry and the county. We're not compounding taxes at each level, which are all going to end up in the price, and the county doesn't have to monitor or collect or follow that many things. So wherever that point is that kind of hits efficiency is something that, you'll know better than us.
Cool. I agree. I think that's a good idea, and yeah, definitely that's an important part of all of this. And there's stories of excessive taxation in Monterey. They have a $15 a square foot cultivation tax, which pretty much puts the whole operation out of business. And it's a voter initiative, so they're going to have a hard time adjusting it. And then Humboldt County has a 1, 2, 3 tax, $1 for outdoor cultivation, $2 for mixed light, which is not a clear definition, and then $3 for indoor cultivation. And some people are complaining that that's breaking them too. And but I think really that's probably just a result of inefficient operations, people who don't understand business, and people who are taking all of their infrastructure costs and acting like those are one-year costs, And so I think there'll be a big there will be some consolidation. There'll be a lot of inefficient operations that'll have to leave because they won't be able to, you know, meet basic tax burdens. But I think that's fine. That's a good thing. Efficient operations aren't worth protecting. The state doesn't want to protect inefficient operations. So if I said that backwards, inefficient operations are not worth protecting. So, yeah, that's it.
Yeah, from taxes, I mean, I think we should just grab some examples from counties, other counties, kind of get an idea of what they're doing. And I concur with Joel. I think if we can simplify where the tax comes from, it's going to be the simplest thing for everybody.
Yeah, and if we have distributors here, that could work because they're a central point of tax collection for both the cultivators and the retail. And so that might work somehow.
Where does, and I think I heard, you know, the Humboldt ones made sense, and Joel's saying, well, make it simple. So in California, you know, the black market is roughly 80-90% of everything. So we're really talking about, I guess, then that would lead towards this square footage tax that makes sense. So Humboldt would probably make more sense than anything else. Is that?
The only problem with Humboldt's tax is that as a cultivator, you're beholden to that tax no matter if you even put the plants in the ground. You file for your application of 15 or 25,000 square foot or whatever that size may be, your garden could fail, you're still beholden to that, you know, $75,000 tax or application fee. Or
it's not a single point of collection too. It's like you'd have to do it there and then retail and distribution. And that was my original idea because that's what other counties are doing, a square foot tax. But I think Joel's idea of finding a single point that taxes everybody. I'm not sure. I mean, the state's doing that, but I don't know how you do that on a county level when you have a farm that's producing for export, you know, not in the county. I don't know how you...
That's kind of where I was going with my question, right?
Sure.
And then as retail develops and
Right.
products from other counties come in that didn't really get taxed in this county, that really wouldn't make sense.
Sure.
Or it might. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know either.
There's a lot of discussion that can be involved around tax, and that can be for the next meeting. And I just make one suggestion that when we come to discuss the tax at the next meeting, that we bring forward, and maybe this is something for Joel to bring forward, just precisely how is the state of California taking and where are they gaining their taxes from in the process? You know, what is required to be reported, what is required to be taxed at the state level? Well, I'm just saying he brings it forward and discuss it as a group, because that could very well be an avenue for which we can apply as a county our taxation points. So.
We can do that. You know, there's also, I think, interesting decisions in whether or not it's a flat tax or, you know, a percentage. And those are things, you know, worth hashing out too.
Yeah, a gross receipts type tax would be able to fluctuate with the market changes because the price of the product is so volatile. That's difficult, and it's more realistic to your actual revenue rather than a square footage tax. That benefits, you know, cultivators who are really skilled and puts an undue burden on those who aren't. You know, and I guess that's okay, but it's not really, I don't think it's good for business necessarily.
So discuss at the next meeting, priorities are taxations, and then additionally, essentially existing retail operations.
Right.
Those are
Define what that
collectives,
means.
but they're,
Yeah.
Because it is kind of hard to determine, I mean, if we're talking about existing retails, all retails currently are not retail, they're nonprofits. I currently have a nonprofit, and I mean, I could consider myself a retail point because I have patients that come directly to my farm and actually, you know, supply. I have a couple cancer patients who, you know, we make our way, we meet halfway. So that is something I think that we do need to think about as we're talking about existing retail spaces, is they're not retail.
Yeah,
they're
collective
existing collective
associations.
systems, and
Right.
Patty has one, Robert has one, I have one, and I'm sure there's multiple others in the county that
So
just
they'd
haven't
be-
come out. Yeah.
They'd be defined as non-producing collective associations. And so when you register with the Secretary of State as a collective, that's one way of organizing your operation. Then what you're doing is you're filing as an operation that is facilitating medical marijuana transactions between members. And that's the limit of it. You're facilitating transactions. You're not selling.
and then these existing transactions.
Collective associations.
Associations, and maybe it's in two different groups of them. You've got people buying, just straight product that's being produced, and then you have people that are maybe trying to import other items to be sold at their facility, and that's really where the problem is lying, trying to get outside entities bringing their products to you, and those entities not wanting to participate because of lack of licensing.
So that's why the existing non-producing collective associations need to be able to apply for state permits so that they can then engage in the regulated market that's taxed.
So within our next conversation, we need to figure out if we can somehow differentiate what those are versus everybody else, because we need to not be putting an ordinance or something in place that is benefiting some person unjustly.
Some municipalities went way back in time with their date for existing for cultivation, and another idea is that you make that date at the date the ordinance is created. And you just don't tell a lot of people so that you don't get thousands of new collective associations in that time period. That's sort of the fear, but going way retroactively on the date may have some legal issues. I don't really know, but yes, defining what that means and where the date on that is. But I think really the question needs to come down is are we going to limit it, and if so, how? Are we going to limit the number? I think with cultivation, you can limit scale of cultivation and not worry so much about the number of gardens. But with retail, you can't limit the scale of a retail operation, right? So it's, it can serve however many people can come through the door, however many people you have working there, right? So then it just comes down to how many individual locations is okay, and where do you want them, and that's where the community debate comes. Some people want lots of them, some people don't want any, and everybody is sensitive to where they're located. So that'll be the meat of our discussion, how many and where they are, I think. All right, meeting adjourned. Can we do that? All right, meeting adjourned. Thank you.